All right, so now we're going to implement Redux, and there's a lot of boilerplate, there's a lot of setup when it comes to Redux. I think that's the biggest turnoff. But once you kind of understand what's going on, you'll probably just have some snippets or even like a starter pack boilerplate, something like that, that you can quickly implement when you create React Redux applications. So let's get started by just installing a couple things. So I'm going to do this in my integrated terminal. I still have my server running in my regular terminal. And I'm just going to install, let's see, npm install. Let's do Redux, of course. We also want React-Redux. And then we also want something called Redux-Thunk, which is actually a piece of middleware that we're going to need for dispatching later on. And I'll talk more about that later. But let's get these three things installed. Okay, and we're going to have something called a store. And that's basically what controls our state. Our state is held in the store, and we're going to have reducers to kind of to receive actions, and then the reducers will control what what trickles down into our components from the state. So let's create the store. That's the first thing that I usually do, and a lot of people set up their structure differently. I like to just create a store.js file right in the source folder. Some people will create a store folder and then create like an index file in there, and they'll put like everything in there, their actions and stuff. So when you look at Redux applications, a lot of them are going to be structured differently. There isn't a right and wrong way in most cases. Most cases it's just preference. So what I like to do is just create a file called store.js. Okay, and this is going to be our store. This is where we basically need to initialize it. Okay, so we need to import a couple things here. I'm actually going to do imp tab, and then we want to import this stuff from Redux. And let's put in some curly braces, and we want to bring in something called create store, which does just that, creates a store, initializes a store. We want apply middleware, because we do have the Thunk middleware that we need to bring in, so we need that. And we need compose, which allows us to basically do more than one thing, and I'll show you what I mean in a second. So let's import Thunk as well. So we'll say import Thunk from, and the package we installed was called Redux-Thunk. And then we're also going to have something called a root reducer. So we want to import that. We haven't created it yet, but we'll import it. So we want root reducer. And we want that to come in from /reducers. Okay, so basically we're going to have a folder called reducers. We'll have an index.js file in that. That's going to be our root reducer. Since it's called index.js, we don't actually have to type in index.js. All right, now here we can actually have an initial state if we want. So we can say const initial state, and we're just going to set that to an empty object. And the reason we're doing this is because the create store method, when we run it, it takes in initial state as a parameter. But we don't want to put anything in here by default. So now what we want to do is, or what I like to do is actually create a variable called middleware. I'm sorry, just middleware. And I want to set that to an array of any middleware that I want to include. In this case, it's just Thunk. And then we want to create our store variable, and we want to set that to the create store method. And create store is going to take in the root reducer. We want to pass that in. We also want to pass in our initial state, which in our case is just an empty object. And then we would want to put in our apply middleware and pass in Thunk. Now, since we're using Redux DevTools, we have to put that in here as well. And that's what compose will allow us to do, is allow us to basically put two things in here. So we want to say compose and then put our apply middleware. And we just want to pass in all of our middleware, which I have in an array right here. So we want to use the spread operator, because anything that's in here, we want to put all of it. Even though there's only Thunk, we could easily add something else. So we want to use the spread operator and just say middleware. Okay, and then we want to put a comma here, and then we want to put the line to use Redux DevTools. Because right now, if I go what am I doing? Let's open up the Chrome tools. If I go to my Redux Dev Tools, and I hope we can see them. I usually have it on the side and I have the browser big. I might have to do that. But you can see how it says no store found. Make sure to follow these instructions. It doesn't work right off the bat. You actually have to add it to your store. So let's click here, and it's going to give us this line right here. Okay, so notice that it's in the create store. Okay, so you want window dot double underscore Redux DevTools extensions, amp double ampersand, and then call it again with parentheses. So this line we actually need to put in. And since we're using apply middleware here as well, that's why we're using compose. It allows us to do both. So let's paste that in. Let me just close this up, make sure this is right. All right, so I mean, this is all one line. It's just that this isn't wide enough, so it looks like it's on two. But we can just either type that in or go to this page and grab it. All right, so now that we did that, we just need to export the store. So let's say export default store, and that should be all we need to do for in this entire file. Okay, yeah, so we're just bringing in this stuff from Redux. We're calling create store, putting it in a variable, we're exporting it. Now what we need to do is go to our app.js file, and we want to import the store into this file. So I'm going to go, let's see, we'll go under where we brought in all our components, and I'm going to bring in the store, but I'm also going to bring in something called provider from React Redux. Okay, and this works very similar to how we had the context API provider. It basically provides our entire application with the state or with the store. So let's say provider, and that's going to come from the React Redux library. And then we also want to import our store. So let's say import store from, and it's going to be /store. Okay, now just like we did with the context API, let me just close this up. We want to wrap everything in the provider. Okay, so we want to go ahead and do that. Oops. Okay, now the difference between the context API and provider in this instance, or Redux in this instance, is we actually pass in the store to the provider. So we want to say provider equals store, like that. Okay, we're passing that in. Let's see, why is that? Oh, I'm sorry. It's we need to pass in a property of store like that, and then pass in the file we brought in. All right, so let's save that. Module cannot find reducers. So it's just complaining because in our store we linked to reducers. It's looking for our reducers folder with an index file, and we don't have that. So let's go ahead and create that in the source folder. So new folder, reducers, and let's create a file in here called index.js, and this is going to be our root reducer. So the root reducer is actually going to be a very small file. All it is basically a meeting place for all of our reducers. So usually when you have different resources, you'll have a certain reducer for each one. So we're only going to have a contact reducer because this is a very small application. But let's say you have like a social network, like in my MERN-STAT course. We have an auth reducer for authentication. We have a post reducer for post. I think we have a profile reducer. We have an error reducer. So the bigger your application, the more reducers you're going to have. And that's why Redux is really great for large applications, is you can really break it up. Rather where the context API, everything is kind of mushed together. I mean, you could break it up, but I think Redux is a better choice personally for bigger applications. Anyways, let's go ahead and import something called combine reducers. Okay, so we're going to import combine reducers, and that comes from Redux. Okay, we also want to import our contact reducer, which we haven't created yet. So we're going to say import contact reducer, and that's going to be in the same folder, in the reducers folder. So we can just say /contact reducer. Okay, then we just want to export default combine reducers. And inside here, we just put an object with all of our reducers that we bring in. In our case, we only have one. So you want to label it. I'm going to call it contact, and then set it to contact reducer. Okay, and this name is really important because this is what it's, when you bring in your state, your application state from Redux into a component, it's going to be available in the props. And how we would access the contact state would be this.props.contact in this case. So whatever I put here, it would be this.props. Whatever I put. Okay, and that should be it for this file. So let's save it. And now what we'll do is just create our contact reducer. And then we should get the Redux dev tools working after that. So, and we should get our application back. So let's say new file in the reducers folder called contact reducer.js. And there we go. So now we can see the Redux this is working. And let's just do const initial state. So each reducer has its own initial state. And it's just going to export a default function. And some of this is going to look pretty familiar to the stuff that we did with the context API. Export default function takes in state, which we're going to set equal to our initial state, and then also an action. Okay, so just like we did in the context API, we're going to evaluate actions by their type. So just like we had like delete underscore contact, add underscore contact, we're going to do that. So we're going to put a switch statement in here, and we're going to evaluate the action dot type. Okay, and for now I'm just going to put the default, and for default I just want to return the state. Oops, state, and save. Okay, so if we look down in the Redux tools and we look in our state, you can see that we have this contact. Okay, so this is because we created a contact reducer, which is right here, but we brought it into our root reducer as contact. If I change this to contact 1 and I save, and then we look at our state, see that it says contact 1. Okay, so whatever you name this is pretty important. And this right here, this empty object, is our state for our contact reducer. So if I were to add something manually into our contact reducer, which we are going to at first, like let's say test, and we'll just set it to test, a string. Let's save, and let's take a look at our state, and you can see inside contact we have test equal to test. Okay, so this is going to show us our contact state. Now if you have a bunch of reducers, you're going to have a bunch of different values here that are going to have different parts of the state. So these Redux dev tools, it's absolutely needed. I couldn't imagine doing anything with Redux without it. The React dev tools is one thing. It allows you to look at individual components and see the state and the props and stuff like that. But this gives you an overall view of your entire application state, which is very important. Like if you have authentication, you can see if the user's logged in, and you can see the user's information and stuff like that. So it's just invaluable, and I couldn't imagine Redux without it. But let's go ahead and let's remove this test right here. I just wanted to show you as an example that would show up. And then the diff tab here, basically when your state changes, this will show you what changed in the state. Okay, if you let's say we have our contacts in here, which we will, and we delete one, in the diff it's going to show us that contact that was deleted. So in the next video, what I want to do is start to implement fetching, putting the contacts into our store. We're going to put them right into the initial state of the contact reducer, and then we want to connect our contacts component to our store and get those contacts. Okay, so instead of having, because right now they're right inside contacts.js, where is it? Right here. We don't want this stuff here. We don't want it in the component state. We want it in the store, so we want to put it right in the reducer. All right, so we'll do that in the next video.